All right, it says we're streaming live.
Yay.
Oh, there we are even. Okay.
How about that?
I always like to check on my phone to make sure that it's official, so we're not just talking to ourselves. But welcome everyone that is listening either live or later on our Facebook page. Today we are thrilled to be talking to Clare Truman. She is the author of, sorry, my lighting is really bad, The Teacher's Introduction to Pathological Demand Avoidance, Essential Strategies for the Classroom. And I just have to say, from both a former classroom teacher and as a parent of a PDA, this book has a wealth of knowledge in it. I think that it is so helpful for teachers, but I also think it's really helpful for parents, because we have a lot of parents that come to us questioning, what supports can I ask for my child to have at school? So for me, as I was reading this, at first I started reading it from the teacher lens, thinking, this is great for teachers. But then the more I read it, it was connecting to me to a lot of the parents that we have talked to. And I thought, wow, this is an awesome resource for parents as well, because it would help them know what to ask for and things like that. So first, I just want to say thank you for writing the book.
Oh, thank you.
Yes. And then I'm just going to start by letting you introduce yourself, and then we'll kind of dive into some questions that Heather and I have. But also, I just want to mention that if anybody watching live does have questions, they're welcome to put their questions in the comments, and we will have some time for Q&A at the end of our chat. So Clare, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Clare. I'm a special education teacher specialising in teaching students with the PDA profile, and I'm also a PhD student at UCL London, and I'm doing a PhD looking at the educational experiences of children with PDA profile. And most importantly, I'm big sister to an autistic young man. So that's how I got interested in this field in the first place.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And you can tell, I assume, that Clare is across the pond. She's she's not here in the States with us, as you can tell by her accent, I assume. So thank you very much again for joining us. We are just, Heather and I are always thrilled when we can chat with other people who obviously understand PDA, because here in the States, we're still, we're a little bit behind the UK in the understanding and, even acceptance that it is a real thing. So the fact that you've published a book about it helps a lot with that validation that it's real. So I'll stop with, I could thank you just for like the next 30 minutes. So maybe we should hop into some questions.
Can I add one thing?
Of course.
Your book is so user-friendly. It's written, not in a clinical, kind format. It's like you can pick up the book and instantly start using the strategies, the approaches and things like that immediately. It's such a user-friendly read. So
that's what I was going for. So that's good to hear.
You did it. You nailed it. You nailed it, Clare.
Absolutely. And I think because you have been a teacher yourself, I don't know if that was part of the wanting it to be user friendly, but I think we all know that as teachers, we're very, very busy people. And so to pick up, a thick book that I don't mean this bad, because those have their place and I like to read those too, but a lot of research or a lot of, teachers want something hands-on. What can I do this afternoon or tomorrow with this kiddo that I don't completely understand? So, and I also wanted to say that I really liked your summaries at the end of each chapter, because that was really helpful too, even though I can imagine, like, once I've read the book, but I was like, oh, what did she say about that? Like, that's a really quick, easy resource to go back. So I guess to get us started, one thing that I know that at least our morning coffee and evening chat groups that we have every other week are probably tired of hearing me say, to one of the most important things is to build a trusting relationship. And that's at school, that's at home, that's, you know, at family gatherings, that's wherever you are. Key to, you know, success for someone with PDA is having trusting relationships. So can we maybe start there as far as, you know, what you found, and just, you know, you share your thoughts on that, of how important it is that these PDAers, you know, that people take the time to build that trusting relationship.
Definitely, that's the core of, I mean, it's the core of teaching anyway, but it's even more important with a PDA. And I used to run a tuition centre for children with a PDA profile who were out of school. It was called the Spectrum Space Centre. And the children there, we had a kind of a list of ground rules, but there were only 4 of them because PDA, so there were only 4, and one of them was, we don't make people do things they don't want to do. And that was a promise from the adults to the children as much as it was a rule for the children. So we did help the children understand that they couldn't make us, you know, I don't know, climb the fence and sing the national anthem from the top of it or something, but we also we're promising the children and the young people, we're not going to make you do something that you don't want to do. And they trusted us because of that, because we put that promise on, we stuck it on the fridge. And I think that trust is really, really important, because you actually find that once that trusting relationship is there, the children and young people can do more than maybe they could do before. So that tolerance to demands fluctuates, and one of the things it fluctuates based on is who the person is making the demands, who the person is in that interaction. And if it's someone that you trust, then you know that they're not going to insist on something, and you can trust them to maybe take a risk and go along with them. If the child trusts you, they might be able to tolerate more demands than they could otherwise. So that's really important.
Absolutely.
And it's about sitting alongside them, sitting alongside them while they talk about Paw Patrol or Lego or Power Rangers or whatever it is. Power Rangers is a bit dated now, isn't it? I'm dating myself. And sitting alongside them and genuinely showing an interest in that, and building that relationship like that.
Yes, you touched on a couple of points. When you just said genuinely, we've talked about that before too, is you can't fake anything with a PDAer. So you can't sit there and pretend that you're interested, because they they pick up on that. And that's the thing that we talk about is, by building that trusting relationship, you increase the margin that they have to work with, because, you're lowering their anxiety. So when you do have to put a few demands in there, they have more room to work with that. And then also, like you said, like I can certainly ask more of my son than say his brother can, because, my son trusts me, or, my PDA trusts me much more than his older brother. But that's because I've honestly worked harder at a trusting relationship, but I'm also with him 24/7, and they have the typical sibling rivalry and that sort of thing. So yeah, I love that. And that's another whole subject for another day, but boy, if we could have spectrum space like everywhere, I would so love that. But maybe we can touch on that a little bit more later. I'll ask another question, and then I'll let Heather ask a few as well. We get a lot of questions about, so it sounds like you just let these kids get away with everything. And like when you said, we won't make you do anything you don't want to do. For some people, that just seems like an absolute, crazy thought. Like, how can we let kids not do anything they don't want to do? Like, they won't learn, they won't behave, they won't get along with other people, they won't. So what do you say when somebody says, well, isn't it just letting them get away with everything?
There's a few things that I say to that. The first is it's actually really difficult to make someone do something they don't want to do. Even neurotypical people, it's actually really hard you really can't do it. You can't make someone do something they don't want to do. It's just that in most interactions in the classroom, the children, even if they don't want to do it. They want to maintain maybe a relationship with the teacher, or they want to maintain their status as a good boy or a good girl, or there'll be other reasons why they want to comply. So you can't really make someone do anything. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it's not a willful rejection of authority or a choice. It's not a choice. And just as we would make accommodations for other people who didn't have a choice over certain things they could or couldn't do, we need to make accommodations for people who don't have a choice about meeting demands. That's an important thing to highlight. A lot of people say what will happen in adulthood when they, which is kind of linked to that. A lot of the reason why people worry about going to make you do something you don't want to do is because they say in adulthood people won't make those accommodations and people will insist that you do something you don't want to do. But actually, again, that doesn't quite stand up to scrutiny. The biggest challenge, I was a very rule-abiding young person. I was very, I followed all the rules. I was a very good little girl. But actually, when you get out into the big wide world, no one tells you what to do. That's the scary thing. And in some ways, the PDAs have it right from age 0, in the sense that they're exercising their autonomy from the very beginning. And if you harness that, if you practice with that, and you start introducing, okay, you want A, I want B, let's see if there's a way we can get A and B in the same interaction. That's the sort of skill you need even in the workplace. You know, bosses aren't telling you what to do anymore. That's not how workplaces are working. It's not how interactions are occurring in society anymore. It's more collaborative. So actually, by not making people do things they don't want to do, and by negotiating and collaborating and liaising with children and young people, we're practicing the skills that they need for adulthood. We're not hampering them. That was a long answer to a short question. I hope that's okay.
Oh, that's
Perfect.
very eloquent. Along with the, that you're just letting them get away with it, comes the consequences part. I know it's probably very similar in England, where we have a very behaviorist approach in schools. So if there's a maladaptive behavior, there should be a consequence. It's very difficult for, especially administrators, the people who are above the teachers, the ones that disseminate the discipline in the school, to change their mindset that consequences are not appropriate, given doled out consequences, that the consequences for PDAers that are need to be more natural, the natural consequences, as opposed to imposed consequences. So what is your rebuttal to that concept?
Definitely, I come up against that a lot when I was working in a school for autistic children. I would sometimes come up against that from colleagues, and one of the things that I used to try and discuss was there's a difference between, say, the sort of decision I may have made as a neurotypical young person who, say, didn't want to do her homework one day. I would have worked out a trade-off. I would have worked out in my head, okay, time with friends now is more valuable to me than time that I'm going to end up spending in detention after school. So I want to spend time with my friends now, and I'll suffer the consequences of the detention after school because I've done a cost-benefit analysis and I've decided that that's more important to me now. So there's way consequences work by altering that balance. So they're based on a neurotypical person making a choice. Consequences work because they alter that balance. If someone makes the detention 5 hours long, suddenly spending time with my friends now is not worth the cost, and I'll do my homework. So a consequence works when a person is making a choice, an informed choice about what they're doing, and they work by altering the balance of the cost and the benefit. If you're not making a choice, then a consequence has no impact because it wasn't a choice to begin with. You weren't doing that analysis. You were maybe reacting to feeling dysregulated, maybe due to sensory issues, maybe because you just haven't eaten that morning, maybe because it's very noisy, maybe because the person you're interacting with is making a lot of demands on you. So it's not a choice. If the behavior is not a choice, then cost benefit doesn't come into it. So consequences have no impact apart from to make someone more stressed. And the more you make someone stressed, the more chance they're dysregulated, the more chance you're going to see behaviors that don't help people, and the cycle continues. So sometimes people don't know till they try. Sometimes you can say that till you're blue in the face, and then someone tries, and then you try not to say, I told you so. But if you can have that conversation about what is this going to achieve, that's the way I would do it.
So a little follow-up on that is, to be honest, we had that situation. We now are home unschooling our PDA, but we gave public school kindergarten a shot, which quickly revealed that it was not going to be a good fit. And there was an instance where the principal said, if this was any other student, he would have to have a consequence. So what would your response be to administration that says, but there needs to be a consequence? I mean, I understand what you just explained, but like maybe I should word it in that what would be an alternative, or what should you do instead of giving a consequence? If there's been a situation, whether it's a physical situation or whatever the case may be, what would you suggest they do instead
oh, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, that's fine.
I used to do a sort of sleight of hand trick a little bit. I used to have a conversation with the PDA child. I wasn't tricking the PDA child, I was tricking everyone around them. But that's okay. I used to have a conversation with the PDA child, a problem-solving conversation that said, I used to sometimes bring a little bit of neurology in, try and talk to them about how the brain worked, what it looked like when it was dysregulated, create visual, I used to do visual things, hands-on things, to say, this is what I think happened to you in your brain at that moment when you did that. I want to help stop that happening again. So how can we work together to make you less anxious in those moments so that doesn't happen? What can I do? What can you do? Have one of those conversations. And then when someone else says, so-and-so didn't get a consequence, oh yeah, he was with me for an hour, having a conversation for an hour. So as long as for the PDA child, you're not making it detention, it's not come with me, you need to sit down and think about what you've done. If you're having a problem-solving conversation, we're going to solve a problem. The other kids can think it's detention. As long as the kid with PDA knows that they have a choice in that conversation, they have a choice. The minute they say, I don't want to have this conversation, they're allowed to walk out. That as long as it's genuine for the person with PDA. So that's one way I used to do it. The other way that sometimes helps is, I think, Heather, you mentioned natural consequences. So that can be really useful. If something's broken, say, then it's genuinely not there to use tomorrow. And you haven't invented that consequence, but maybe you're not going to rush to Amazon to replace it immediately because it's genuinely broken. And I think that's fine. So those are two ways that I would do it.
And I love that, what you said there about your conversation, because I know my own personal experience with my son is, when his anxiety is so high and he does, act out or would throw something or something would happen. you know, or we talked about how back in the day before we understood him and knew what was going on, and he would really struggle, but then it would almost be like he'd flip a switch and then he'd be crying and like melting in my lap and saying he's sorry for how he acted. Which also goes back to that kind of that choice thing. Like you can tell that he wasn't just choosing to do it, because now he's, you know, his response was just, it was in the moment, and that's what had to happen. That's what his neurobiology was, you know, that's where it was taking him. But I love where you actually problem solve with them, because they don't want to behave in, you know, the ways that our kiddos sometimes do as a result of their high anxiety. So, and the fact that you are problem solving, because I think a lot of times this whole consequence is like a detention. From my experience at some schools, it's literally a kid sitting in the room by themselves, you know, supposed to be working on their schoolwork, but there's not a lot of conversation, or maybe there's a little conversation, but it's mainly punishment, you know, is what it's kind of seen as, versus you're problem solving with them and helping them understand ways to, you know, better handle the situation the next time. So, what would you tell teachers that, you know, are more traditionalist and maybe not as flexible in their thinking? How do you help teachers get on board with this way of teaching? You know, because for some people, this is like, wait a minute, I've got 25 other kids in the room and I can't, you know, accommodate just one, or, you know, again, the whole, you're letting them get away, or they're not held accountable, or whatever, you know, all the things that are said for people that don't really understand this way of teaching. How do you help get teachers on board?
Well, at the very end of the book, I sort of have a little confession, and I say that I never went into teaching expecting to be this kind of teacher. Mm-hmm. So because I was such a rule-following child, I assumed that that was what I was going to do. I was going to go in and be maybe not strict, but be kind of firm but fair, and have, you know, a row of children doing exactly what I told them. And it was going to be quite, I'd benefited from quite traditional schooling. So I thought that that would be great for everyone. And because you only know your own experience, right? So you don't kind of, so it was having the children in my classroom that just didn't learn that way that made me write the book and change how I taught and set up the center and all of that kind of stuff. So I would first ask the teachers to think about the individual child in their classroom and say, is this working for them? And then ask the question, if it's not working for them, because the answer is going to be no, if it's not working for them, is your classroom really working? And generally speaking, you know, children whose needs are not being met can cause quite a lot of disruption in a classroom. That's not the motivation for fixing the problem. The motivation for fixing the problem is to meet the need. But the sort of rebuttal to a teacher that says I can't meet the needs of this one child in a class of 30 is, well, none of the 30 are going to learn if you're not, because it's going to be chaos. So it is whoever's needs you're not meeting, whether they're PDA or any other needs that you're not meeting. So if you want to achieve what you're setting out to achieve, you need to do it another way. Sometimes I say we're heading for the same destination and you're trying to go from A to B the shortest route, which is the route you know, which is clear expectations. Everyone sat in rows. You do as I say. That's the shortest route to get from A to B. But for this child, there is a mountain in the way. And suddenly it's not the shortest route from A to B anymore, because there's a mountain in the way. It's going to take us ages to climb. So we're going to have to go round. And it's going to take us a little bit longer, and it's going to go into territory we've never been in before. But you're still going to get to B. And it's the only way, because we can't climb that mountain. It's too big.
I love that analogy. And
yeah, me too.
Speaking of time, like that's another thing we talk about with our groups a lot, is this idea of time, that building the relationship and getting from point A to point B, and just all the things that it takes time with our PDAers. And you know, we had a parent share that they had been kind of laying the groundwork for something that they had been working on. It took a year, but boy, when they got there, what a celebration. And they could look back and, you know, celebrate themselves for taking the time and at their child's pace, and knowing that it just took a little bit at a time. And that's not to say that not everything takes a year long, but it's just, you know, being dedicated to that slow, steady, dedicated process that, you know, our kiddos need so much.
And you see a lot of sites on the way. You know,
Yes.
if you're taking the long route, the circuitous route, you see a lot of things you didn't expect to see on the way.
Yeah.
So it's fun to do that. It's fun to learn different ways of thinking, different ways of working. That's all good.
And I would argue, having been a former classroom teacher, that a lot of the things that you suggest in your book, you know, they're beneficial for all the kids. It's not just you're not just teaching to the one or the two. A lot of it is beneficial to the others, whether, you know, they may not be acting out or having a meltdown or a panic attack or anything like that. And you might not even know that they need this, because they're the kid that, like, you know, like all of us who were rule followers and just did it the way we were supposed to do it, not knowing that maybe that wasn't the most helpful or not my learning style, but I just did it because that's what I was supposed to do. And I really liked what you talked about on your invitations to learn. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so invitations to learn, when we had the centre, we didn't want to say it's 9:30, it's numeracy time, everyone sit down and get your books out, because that wasn't how we worked. So instead, the young people, the children, would come in, and we'd hired a cricket pavilion, that was our centre, and laid out on all the tables and often across the floor and on any surface we could find were big sheets of brown paper, with which I chose brown paper because it looks the least schooly. If you choose flip chart paper, they remember it from school. So big rolls of brown paper that look nothing like school. And I would write on there, effectively, I'd write a lesson. So it might say at the top, we had one about 3D shapes. We are learning about 3D shapes. And on the brown paper was loads of Play-Doh. Do you have Play-Doh?
Mm-hmm.
Like modeling clay, yeah. Loads of modeling clay and straws, drinking straws. And I'd done a little model of a cube made out of modeling clay and drinking straws. And the materials were just there as an invitation. Do you want to make something like I did? But no one comes over and says, do you want to make a cube like Claire's done? The questions are all on the paper. So the child walks in the door, sees it, and thinks yes or no. If they think no, they move on to another one, and that's absolutely fine. If they think yes, that's great, and they get stuck in and and then I might provide a little bit more stretch and challenge by I had sort of cards up my sleeve with more challenging shapes and things they might not have encountered before, things they might not know the name of, and let's see if we can work out together how you'd make this. But it's an invitation. They can say no at any point.
Mm-hmm.
They can, because that's what an invitation is. At any point you can turn around and you can say no thank you, and you can walk off. So that was how invitations to learn works. If you don't have very much space, so we were lucky we had a whole cricket pavilion. If you are working with one child in a classroom where everyone has a desk, you can shrink them right down and you can put them in a lunchbox or a little takeaway tub. So I've done the same activity, the drinking straws and the modeling clay, but shrunk down using craft matchsticks and blue tack in a tiny takeaway tub. Exactly the same activity, but shrunk down for a smaller space. That one I need.
I'm thinking of ways. Yeah, it's prompting me to think of ways to incorporate that in our unschooling, you know, which I kind of already do. You know, I put out learning opportunities, but then just never say a word about them. so that my son can, you know, choose whether or not he's going to do it. And most of the time, because I've tried to pick out a high interest activity for him, he will. So you know,
early years educators do it all the time.
right. Yes.
So,
yes.
but somehow we think children outgrow it. So if you walk into a nursery, or certainly here, I don't know about
Yes.
you, if you
Yes.
walk into a nursery for the under fives, it's all done like this.
Yes.
Yeah. Everything's like this. And the staff, I used to work in a nursery, and the staff are there to facilitate learning, but they very rarely, you might have story time maybe, but you very rarely get everyone sat around listening to the same thing at the same time. You have the water tray and it's got some shapes in, and you have the sand tray and it's got some numbers in, and people just play and then they learn. So this was a kind of teenage youth group style equivalent of that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I was the last time I was in the classroom, it was I taught 3 to 5 year olds in a special needs preschool. We would call it preschool, you call it nursery. And it was hard because I had never in my wildest dreams did I think I would have that age group. But it was the most freeing teaching experience I had ever had, because it was all play-based. It was just, you just let them learn the way they learn naturally. And it was amazing. Hard, but it was amazing.
And it made me think of, I remember one time when my son they were doing an assessment, and it was in the preschool, the very early years. Honestly, he might have barely been 3. And I remember how they commented that he wouldn't engage in what they wanted him to engage in, because in their mind, they had an activity that they wanted him to do so that they could do their assessment. Well, back then, and to a certain extent now, is my son was, you know, come into a room, and it was basically a playroom. So you can imagine, you know, a 3-year-old, I would think, you know, that they would want to check things out. They're probably not going to just go sit at one activity. Some will, but, you know, my, at the time, less than compliant child was all about, let me check this out. But what I love about that too, the invitations to learn, is I could see where not just necessarily, I don't want to do this. It could be more about, I don't want to do this right now. Or they start to engage, but then they may make one, you know, shape or something. And then, speaking of, hey, go ask Dad, buddy. You know, they may engage and make one shape, but then they're done with it and they want to go check something else out. And then they might, you know, be there a little bit and go check something else out, but they might realize and come back to the shapes and then spend 40 minutes. But just the opportunity to check everything out, rather than, you know, I feel like more traditional, me having been a more traditional teacher, we're going to do this activity from beginning to end. You know, there's a start time and a stop time, and then we're going to move to this, and then we're going to move to this. And so I love that there's more opportunity to explore, and that doesn't mean that they won't come back to it, because with the invitation to learn, they have the opportunity to come back. So I just love how that could work, really, like you said, at any age, because you can adapt the activity for whatever they're learning.
And you can adapt as you go as well. So I had, I don't know why I thought this was a good idea, but I remember an activity that I had sorting butterflies into paper butterflies into a grid. So it was sorting by categories was the target. So can you sort, so it was sort of a Carroll diagram with green, not green, you know, longer than 10 centimeters, shorter than 10. So you had to sort them. And one of the lads came in and looked at it and was just, no, I'm not doing anything with butterflies. So fair enough. So we got masking tape and did a big grid of his Nerf guns later on. So same principle. He said automatic, semi-automatic, not automatic, I can't remember, but there were lots of Nerf guns and they were categorized, and it was the same principle. And so if you aim for the target rather than the task, And when this is what I say all the time, you're aiming for the target, not the task. I know you spent ages on the task, so you kind of invested in them getting it done. But actually, what you're aiming for is the target behind the task. And that can be achieved 100 different ways, and the child will take you there in a route you never expected.
Which I find more fun. You know, as a unschooling mom slash, I'm not really a teacher because we're unschooling, whatever you want to call me, a participant in unschooling. I have found it so fun because my son takes me places that I would never go. You know, so that's what I love about. And what's beautiful is he's taking me there and I have the targets in my mind. So then you're ready, versus if you have the plan in your mind and it doesn't go where you want it to go, then like you end up, I have nothing at the end of it, to where if you follow along with those targets in your mind, like you said, there's endless ways to get there. So,
and it goes perfectly with your analogy about having to go around the mountain or over the mountain. You know, it takes longer, but there's beautiful sights along the way.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
And things you didn't expect to see, you know, like that's I think as a teacher, you know, we have our expectations in mind. And for me, sometimes I got so focused on where we were headed that I didn't take the time to look what else was going on, you know, because I was just so focused. And in all fairness, I want to be sure that we say we respect teachers, like
absolutely
to the nth degree. I have, you know, as a former teacher, as dear friends that are still in the classroom and do an excellent job. It's hard to notice some of those things because of everything that you have to do as a teacher. You know, it's not just teaching one lesson. It's so, you know, it's so much more. So I don't want this to come across. Sometimes I think the message gets across that we're, you know, anti-traditional teacher, and it's not that at all, by any stretch of the imagination. And we also realize that there are limits and constraints on what you can and can't do from, you know, whether it be your administrators or your school district or at the state level or whatever. So I just want to say that we certainly respect teachers. We're just hoping to, by this conversation alone, is just share other ideas and ways to look at teaching. Heather, what other questions do you have? You're thinking of?
Being able to adapt traditional autism strategies, you know, how maybe take a couple of those and show us how you can reframe them to make them PDA friendly.
Yeah, definitely. So I taught in a school for autistic children where one of the children in my class had PDA and the other 8 didn't. So I had to use a lot of traditional autism strategies to meet the needs of 8 of the children. And then this 1/9 was not meeting his needs, so I had to kind of adapt. So one of the things I used to do, for example, if I was giving clear instructions, which is maybe a traditional autism strategy, say I was giving step-by-step instructions for a task, which might be quite off-putting for a PDA, then at the bottom of the worksheet or at the top, I would put, this is Claire's idea, but you might have a better one, and a little space for them to write or draw their own idea. So it didn't take me any more time. Anyone who needs step-by-step instructions just ignores that box. If you like step-by-step instructions, you just don't fill in the my own idea box because you don't have your own idea. But if for some people that get out clause is what they need to take the pressure off, then and sometimes they had great ideas. So that was good. Actually teaching the children to do that target behind the task is really helpful. So if you have your target really clearly somewhere on the sheet and you say you can use your own idea to get there, that's really helpful. Also, we used to have teach tasks. Do you have those in America? Kind of highly structured work tasks that are presented on a system.
Yes, and it's individual, and they go around like
teach.
Yes, I'm familiar.
Or there's like Yeah, so
Yes.
they're kind of, the way we had it set out was there were trays, and each child had 6 trays, and it was in a little wheelie tray thing, and you had to do all 6 trays, and you had to follow the process exactly. So you do tray 1, you put it on your desk, you do it, you put it in the finish line tray 2, and it was very structured. And if the PDA hadn't done that, there would have been a kind of slot in the timetable in the day where he would have been free reigning and there wouldn't have been staff to take care of him, so that wasn't going to work. So I used to do different things with his trays. So sometimes I would do the tasks and he would make mine better, so he would improve on what I'd done. Sometimes I would give him the tasks with a stack of post-it notes, which are sticky notes to write on. And I don't know what translates and what doesn't, and so we're okay. So he could write on, I say, on the sticky notes, let me know what's a good task and what's not a good task and what would make the not good task better. And he would jot down, like, this only took me 5 seconds, you need to make it harder, or whatever. And then the important thing is that the next day you don't present the same task again. You take the feedback on board, because otherwise you ruin the trust. But the next day we'd do better, and then he'd be learning more. So win-win. So those are 2 tips for how to make things that are structured for autistic children less structured for PDAs.
Brilliant.
That's brilliant.
Yep.
It reminds me, this morning I was attempting to play Some Swamp with my son, and we have this, speaking of rules, I've kind of put in place that we play the game the first time the way that it's intended to be played, and then he can make up, whatever rule, make it better. Only because I want him to experience it, as it was intended, and then make whatever modifications he can. And so it was just so funny this morning because he was like, okay, so can we just stop and use a little logic? And I was like, well, sure. And he said, I mean, who wants to be the snail? It's the slowest one. Because there's a snail, a crocodile, a frog, and a dragonfly. And I was like, good point. Let's, I know that's not in the rules, but that's great. Let's just start there. So we got rid of the snail. But the whole time we were playing, he was like, okay, so do you want to hear about, because he kept wanting to change it up. So the whole time, before every time he would roll, he would tell me how to do it better or different, to make the game better. But it was still like, it has the numbers on the dice and then the operations dice, which is plus or minus. But he was saying, when we get to the realistic mode of the game, the plus is when you're going to move forward and the minus is when you're going to have to move backwards. And I was like, that's I mean, he was getting the plus and minus concept from us playing it how it was intended to be played, but then he was changing it to work for how he wanted it to work. So and a lot of the things that he suggested, I mean, were great, and it was exactly what you were saying earlier about the targets. Like, if I have the targets in my mind and he changes the game up, it doesn't matter at all if we never play the game the way the rules say to play it. But anyway, I just love that all of what you're saying. It's just like, I'm like, that's exactly what is happening. And I can see in a classroom just how freeing that would be for so many students, because there's so many different ways that our kiddos' brains are working, and it's not always in the way that we have designed the lesson plan. So
Claire, is there anything that we haven't brought up that you feel is, worth talking about, something that's you'd like to just chat about?
Oh, that's a good question. Something came into my head a moment ago and flew out again, so that's not very helpful. I guess it'd be maybe fun to talk a little bit more about the centre and how that worked, if you're interested.
Oh, I'd love to. It's my ambition. My husband's in the military, but we're really, really close to retirement. And that means I don't have to move around every 3 years, and I can actually put roots. And it's actually one of my hopes and dreams that I can actually open a school like you described, Spectrum Space. So I would love to hear about it.
Ah, brilliant, because it's one of my favorite things to talk about.
We're both like,
so for people who don't know, who haven't read the book, the way it worked was we had a very small number of children. So we had 9 children at our busiest. That was our busiest time. And they ranged in age. The youngest was 8 and the oldest was 18. And they each had 2 adults each to work with them. So every child had 2 adults. There were a lot of adults. If we were all in, there were 18 adults as well as the 9 children. It was a busy cricket pavilion. But they weren't often all in, because the point of having 2 adults was so that it was safe for them to go wherever they wanted and learn wherever they wanted. So by having 2 adults, it's safe to go. You've got enough people to keep you safe, whether you're deciding to stay at home, or deciding that you're going to learn at the theme park that day, or that you're going to learn in the outdoor space, wherever. It's safe because you've got 2 adults with you to keep you safe. So the adults would go to the child's home in the morning and meet them there and say, how are you feeling today? Claire's got some stuff set out at the centre. I think she's got some modelling clay and some straws. I don't know why. And do you want to go and have a look, or would you rather stay here, or is there somewhere else you'd like to go? And there were planned activities as well that were all presented as a menu of options, so you didn't have to do them. They were all clubs and optional trips out. So instead of a science lesson, we had science club, and it's a club because you can choose to join a club. A lesson, you have to be there, but a club you can choose to join. And people chose to join or not join. And sometimes people would watch from a distance and then slowly get closer and closer until they were part of it. But all the way through, it was about following the child's interests. So the 2 adults working with the child had a target in their head, just like we talked about the target behind the task. They had a target in their head, and they would try and get that target into the day, but based on what the child wanted to do. So if the target's to count to 20 and the child wants to go to the park, you can count your footsteps on the way, or you can count leaves when you get there, or you can make a daisy chain with 20 daisies. But it's what the child wants to do. And sometimes they'd get halfway up the A31 to the centre and pull into Starbucks and change their mind, and okay, we're learning in Starbucks today, fair enough. It didn't matter.
That's fantastic. So was it every day? Did they attend every day if they wanted to?
There's an annoying law in the UK that you can't do that. So unless you've, it gets very complicated and boring and legal, but if unless you're registered with the schools regulator here, which is Ofsted, called Ofsted, unless you're registered with them, you can't offer full time. So it was 3 days a week. Because the minute you register with them, you have to do assemblies every morning, and you have to do numeracy at 9:30, and you have to. So in order to avoid having to do all those things, we were regulated as a childcare provision, and we could only do 3 days. But that's a boring legal issue.
Trust me, we understand. Yes, we get it. How many hours a day during those 3 days?
It was generally, across the week, we had 17 hours, because 18 was the threshold for registration. So it generally worked out at about kind of 9:30 to 3 kind of thing.
So what was were these children on like education other than school kind of programming, so they didn't have to go to school on the days that they came to the center, or they just went to the center?
They just went to the centre, and then sometimes the council would provide, so the local authority area would provide tutors for the other days if they could cope with that at home. But some of them just came to the centre. They didn't go to school. And
I know I think you said this in the book, and I apologize, I've forgotten, is what ages?
The youngest was 8, and the oldest was 18. Again, for complicated legal reasons, because if you're working with children under 8, you have to have separate rules and regs, and you can't have them with the 18-year-olds and things like that.
Sure.
So.
Understandable.
And
I know in a state that I previously taught in, you couldn't have a 5-year difference between the youngest child and the oldest child in the same classroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I don't know about other states, but this was the law in Ohio.
And Claire, when you mentioned how you called them groups, I really liked how you called them groups. So it was more like you can join or you don't have to join, and the opportunity that they were happening, at least the ones at the location where you were held, is that they were. I remember reading in the book that they were where student, or I don't even know if you called them students. Did you call them students? Because you didn't call it school.
We didn't call it school. I did call it students because they were
Okay.
learning, but
Okay.
yeah.
I was like, ooh, maybe I'm not supposed to call them students. But anyway, that they could see what the clubs were doing so that they could get familiar with it. And I just think that's brilliant, because even with my son in high school, when my husband and I, we went to freshman orientation and they talked about joining clubs, I could immediately tell my son was like, I don't know about that. To where that, again, that is a perfect invitation for all students, is to be able to see what goes on before actually joining, to see if you're interested or you'd be comfortable. And just the way that choosing our words so carefully, and we talk about that a lot, of like using declarative language. Like one of my famous ones is, I do a lot of wondering around my house. I wonder, so that Drew can hear it, but he can or cannot respond. And just changing it up to sound, that it's a club you can join or you don't have to join. But I love how you really have put so much thought in just the wording of things. So everything seems so much more approachable, and less demanding.
Yeah, and the menu of choices as well. So when the term card came out with the calendar on it, it would have, say, we're going to the cinema on Friday to see Minions, but one of the first activities when the calendar came out that the children would do with their staff members is take a big black pen and cross off anything they didn't want to do, and draw or write something they did want to do. And that was part of our routine, that every time the calendar comes out, they're there with their black markers and they're crossing off I'm not going to the cinema to see Minions, okay? And that was a genuine, everything was a genuine choice. It was a menu of options. It wasn't a timetable of demands.
And speaking of that, could you speak to the idea that if the adults are not in charge, and well, of course the adults are in charge as far as safety and all that, but if the adults are not designing the lessons and teaching the lessons and the kids are taking it all in, can you share, based on your experience with Spectrum Space, what did you see as far as the children learning? Because there's this idea that if we're not imparting all of our knowledge, that the kids aren't going to learn. So what did you see as far as the kids having all of this choice, but still, I assume that they learned?
They did. Some of it took quite a lot of prep in the beginning. So before we opened, I took a list of targets, which is from something over here called the functional skills criteria, which is a list of maths and English targets and computing targets, and it's all practical stuff. It's using money. It's not trigonometry. It's using money. It's not it's using weights and measures in cooking. It's all the practical stuff. And I took all those targets and put them in a grid for each student with boxes next to it for the date when they'd achieved it. So behind the scenes, there was quite rigorous tracking of learning. The children didn't necessarily see it until they were much older and able to take a bit of ownership over it. But the younger ones didn't see that they were at point on red level of the grid. I just knew that. And I spent time on the days when the children weren't in, the staff were still in. So the children were in 3 days a week, but the staff were in 5 days a week. And we would meticulously go through that grid and each week and say, right, they've done numbers to amounts of money to £1. The next step will be managing to do that to £20. So ways you could achieve that would be going shopping, playing shop here, going through the supermarket catalogue or the toy shop catalogue and adding prices. And these are the ways you could achieve it, going to the cafe. And we sort of got loads of ideas down, and then the child took us in generally a completely different direction. but it was very meticulously, the targets were really meticulously planned. The tasks were unplanned and following the children's lead, but the targets were meticulously planned. So they were making progress. And every year we had to report back to the local authority who was funding that each child had reached a certain target. Yeah. So that was how we did that.
So there's a comment from, no, I just lost it. There's a comment from Vicky Worth.
Oh, I know Vicky Worth.
She said Spectrum Space was a fantastic place to work.
Vicky used to work with us. Yeah, Vicky. So the Spectrum Space staff were amazing, and yeah, it was a great team that we had, and Vicky used to work with us. So I'm glad she has fond memories.
And just what you described, I have to be completely transparent, and obviously going from a classroom teacher and hearing about unschooling, I have to admit and say, when I first heard of unschooling, I too thought, like, you just let your kid do whatever they want all day? Like, that sounds crazy. But what you said is, like, what you guys did at Spectrum Space is ideally what unschooling families are doing. It's that behind the scenes, you have in your mind what your child, what you want or need them to learn, to be successful, which, again, our PDAers definitely redefine how they're going to get there. But obviously, being able to add numbers and being able to read. There's some basics that our kiddos, need to be successful versus, does my son really need to know all the details of, World War II necessarily? Well, maybe not. Maybe he's interested in, something else. But I love how you describe that, because it really does explain what goes on with unschooling. It's not that our kids aren't learning. They are certainly learning. It's just that it's interest-based and it's child-led. And so, like, I'm in the state of Missouri, and I do have to keep lesson plans and keep notes about what we've done and things of that nature. But for me, it's more working backwards again. It's him leading me, like today in the game, and then instead of really me having a plan, I have the targets in mind, and then I go back and write how we got there, for the documentation piece, I guess. So I just really love that you shared it in that way. And so that because we're getting a lot more, I think, because of the pandemic, and between the pandemic and a lot of our PADAers not being successful in traditional school for a variety of reasons, that we do have more parents that are, trying homeschooling and unschooling. And so a lot of what you've shared today, we don't all have Spectrum Space, but what you've shared is brilliant in that a lot of this can be applied at home with homeschooling and unschooling.
Definitely. What I do now is I do Spectrum Space by post. So we don't have the centre anymore, but I have students who are dotted all around the country, and I send them a physical box that has the invitations to learn in it. And they open them at home. So it's like they get, one of the students said it's like Christmas every week. So you get a box every week, which has all the learning activities in, and everything is optional again, just like at the centre. So I say to parents, if you open a task and they don't want to do it, then it can just go straight in the bin, or it can go to the charity shop, whatever. everything is optional, but all the learning invitations are all in there, and they work on it whenever, in the middle of the night or first thing on a Friday morning when it arrives. It doesn't matter, whenever. It's just all optional. Yeah, Spectrum Space by post.
That is amazing.
That's brilliant.
That gave me goosebumps. Like, yeah, my head is just, yeah.
I know. I just feel like we could talk all day.
Yeah, yes, I
I
know.
looked at the time and I was like, oh my gosh, an hour has already passed. I just wanted to check and make sure there's no more. We have a lot of comments, very positive comments about what you shared. I was trying to just make sure if we have any questions.
I didn't see any questions. Just a lot of affirming comments.
Like, I want to figure out how to do spectrum space in the US. Bailey, we do too. Let's talk.
Yes.
Oh, brilliant. If you want to email me for any advice, if you go to my website, which is spectrumspace.co.uk, my contact details are on there and people can email me. Email is the best way to get hold of me.
Thank you so much. I can't even tell you. I mean, I hope you've been able to tell through our excitement how much we appreciate, number one, you even being willing to chat with us today, but the fact that you wrote the book and and honestly, just the dedication that you have given to our kiddos who want to learn and do learn, but they just need to learn a little differently. The fact that you've given so much of your time and energy to them, I just want to thank you for that, because that's huge.
Oh, thank you.
Ditto what she said.
It's been lovely to talk. It's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you, and I hope this isn't the last time we're talking. We'll have to keep in contact with one another.
Definitely.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Claire.
It was very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.